Welcome to Live Daf, your online Daf Yomi Shir.
Shalom Aleichem, welcome back. Today's Daf is Tzadi Hey. We are at the Mishnah 3 lines from the top of the Amud. Mishaya Nasui Beis Nashim. This fellow was married to two women. So we have Reuven married to Rachel first, and then Leah as a second wife. Uma Char Es Sodeu. Now this fellow Reuven actually sells off one of his fields, and Rashi said it was Meshubad Liksubasa. It was bound, it was committed to the Ksuba payat. He sold it off. V'kasva Rishona. Now the first wife, Rachel, actually commits in writing Lilekech to the buyer who purchased that field from her husband Reuven. She writes to him as follows: I am confirming the sale. Din udvarim einli imcha. You know, I will be totally uninvolved with respect to this sale. I have no claims on you. Go ahead, enjoy the field. I will never come back and repossess that field in order to collect my husband's ksuba payat. So we're assuming that she's married now, and she's writing him ahead of time, look, I am relinquishing all claims on your field, even though she has a right to, technically, to repossess that field if there's nothing else to collect from, but have it, enjoy it, it's yours. But only Rachel, wife number one, gave that commitment to the buyer. But wife number two, Leah, who comes after Rachel, whose commitment, whose lien, whose claim on Reuven is seconded to Rachel, gave no such promise to the buyer. Husband passes away or divorces them. They're both there to collect their ksuba. Hashnia, so Leah, wife number two, Moitzia Malikeach. She has a full right to repossess that property from this buyer as per her Kesuba claim. She made no promise to him to leave it by him. She totally has a right to take it from him. But it doesn't stay by her for long. Verishoina minashnia. Wife number one, meaning Rachel, who has first claim on any properties of Reuven, will extract that same property from Leah. Look, I come first. So although she could not have gone straight to the buyer because she had relinquished her rights as per the buyer, but once Leah takes it from the buyer, rightfully takes it from the buyer because she had a full claim on that property, Rachel could turn around and take it from Leah as the first claimer. But it doesn't stay by her for too long either. The buyer takes a look at Rachel and he says, you're holding that field that used to belong to me. Haven't you given up all your rights? All your claims with respect to that field, with respect to our interaction? Here, let me have it back. He takes it back from Rachel. But then, you know what happens? Leah takes it from the buyer. She has no such commitment with the buyer. So when she gets it, Rachel turns around and says, well, what are you doing with a field that belonged to our husband? I have first claim on his field. I take it. It just goes around and around with no end in sight. Until they actually decide to compromise. They come to some sort of deal. And the same scenario would repeat itself with a Baal Choiv, with an Isha Baal Choiv, as the Gemara will describe for us. So what did she do? She gave up her rights to collect from this property. Asks the Gemara, so what? What happens if you write, this type of language? It doesn't mean anything. You haven't really given anything away. You have two partners. And Reuven turns to Shimon and he says, I'm not going to interact with you regarding this field. I have no involvement with it. I'm backing off from this field. It's meaningless unless he actually gives it away as a gift. So Dinu Dvarim is meaningless. Apparently we are speaking B'shekonu miyada. The Lekeach actually made a proper kinyan, a proper commitment. A kinyan is more than just a verbal promise. Rashi says, based on the Gemara back on Daf Pei Gimel, when you do a kinyan pertains to actual items and objects and real estate. So when she made this kinyan, in effect, she gave her away. She was makna. She granted him. She gave up any rights. She gave him the schus to hold on to that field, irrespective of her claims. So she gave him a schus. Big deal. So let's say she did that. Even if she actually gave him, she sold him. Doesn't matter. Why? Tema, she can still claim, Nachas ruach asisi lebali. I was just trying to satisfy my husband. I was trying to be nice to my husband, as a wife typically tries to do. I knew that he sold you the field, so I ratified it, I confirmed it, I certified it. I wouldn't have done it on my own. I wasn't really trying to do it sincerely. I was just trying to stay on my husband's good side. And that's a valid claim. Miloit nan, haven't we learned in a Mishnah in Maseches Gittin? Lokach mineish. So we have this field which was designated for his wife's Kesuba. He decided to sell it to a stranger. Stranger comes and first makes a purchase from the husband on that field, and then decides, it's a smart thing to go ratify it and have his wife confirm it as well, because after all, she has a claim on that field. So he goes and visits the wife as well. And he completes the purchase with the wife. It's meaningless. Mikhay batal. It's null and void. Alma, you know why? Apparently because a wife can always claim, Nachas ruach. I was just trying to satisfy my husband and make him happy. In our Mishnah as well, although she said, Dunu dvarim ein imach with a kinyan, big deal. She can always say, Nachas ruach asisi lebali. Amar b'zera, Amar b'chizda. Like Kasha, the answer is, it depends which Tana is speaking. It's machlekes Tanoim. Rabbi Meir, our Mishnah, which does not subscribe to the concept of Nachas ruach asisi lebali. That's Rabbi Meir's shita. He doesn't hold of it. But the other Mishnah, in Gittin, that purchasing a field from husband and then from wife is null and void because of Nachas ruach asisi. Rabbi Yehudi, that's Rabbi Yehuda Shita Desani. Where do we find this machlekes? We have a Mishnah in Bava Kama. Kasav l'rishon, v'lo chas maloi. Husband goes and sells one field. We're talking about fields that are committed to his wife's ksuba. Field number one he sells to Reuven. V'lo chas maloi. The wife refused to ratify the deal. L'sheni, he takes another field and sells it to Shimon. This time around, she's cooperating. V'chas maloi, she certifies the deal. She signs on. He passes away, he divorces. She's looking to collect her ksuba, hibdo ksuba, so she's totally lost. Her ksuba, divir Rab Meir. Why? Because although she only relinquished her claims from purchaser number 2, but purchaser number 1 says, look, at the time of my purchase, when I bought this field, I left you something else to take from. So you don't have a right to claim from this field. Take from the other one. But I can't take the other one. Why not? Oh, it was sold to somebody else? That's your problem. Why did you ratify that deal? That's your issue. So she's totally lost. And she can't say, well, deal is off. I never meant it sincerely. I was just trying to do nachas for my husband. She can't do that. That is Rabbi Meir's shita. And that corresponds to our Mishnah as well. When an Isha signs on, it's confirmed. Rabbi Yehuda Eimer, no. Yichayla Isha Taimar, an Isha can always get up and say, Nachas ruach, asisi li bali. I was just trying to be nice to my husband. Atem malachem alai. What kind of claim do you have against me? You should understand that it wasn't sincere, it wasn't genuine. I was just trying to be nice to my husband. And this shita of Rabbi Yehuda is reflected in the Mishnah in Gittin. Lokach mineish, right? V'chazav lokach mineish. It's batal because of this svara. Nachas ruach asisi lebali. Asks the Gemara, well, we have two Mishnahs. One here in Kesubos, a stam Mishnah without a name, and that is going like Rabbi Meir. When an Isha confirms her husband's sale, she in effect is confirming and certifying it. You don't say nachas ruach, right? Then we have the other Mishnah in Gittin, also a Stam Mishnah, presented by the same compiler, Rabbi HaKadosh, Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, which reflects Shitas Rabbi Yehuda. When a wife backs up her husband's deal, it's null and void, mikchay batel, because she was just trying to cooperate with her husband. Really? The Rabbi HaKadosh, who compiled the Mishnayos, Sasam lahachik Reb Meir. Over here in Kesubos, he presents a Stam Mishnah like Reb Meir. V'sasam lahasam Rabbi Yehuda, whereas in Gittin, he presents an anonymous Mishnah in line with Rabbi Yehuda. Which Shita does he adopt? Okay, so we're on to possible solution number 2. We had a stira. Here in Kesubos, it's confirmed. There in Gittin, it's null and void. Omar Papa Begrusha v'divrei HaKol. Perhaps we're going with Shitas Rabbi Yehuda. An Isha can always say, I was just trying to cooperate with my husband to avoid any, tension. As per the Mishnah in Gittin, Mikchay Batel. Over here in Kesubos, we're not speaking about a married woman, we're speaking about a grusha. This whole story in the Mishnah took place after divorce. In which case she has no claim of nachas ruach, I did for my husband, she was already divorced. Begrusha v'divrei HaKol. Rav Ashi Amar, he has a third proposal to answer this kash. Here's a chiddush. Even Rabbi Meir technically subscribes to the idea of nachas ruach asisi libali, but it depends when. Typically yes, but sometimes no. Rav Ashi Amar Kula Rabbi Meir. You know the Mishnah over here, Mishnah in Gittin, it's all Rabbi Meir speaking. V'at kan like Amar Rabbi Meir Hassam. It's only in the other Mishnah, Bava Kama, where Rabbi Meir disagrees with Rabbi Yehuda. You know why? Ela b'shnei lekuches. We're speaking about a story of 2 separate deals, 2 separate purchases. Right? In Mishnah there, husband first sold a field to Reuven, on which she had no issues. She didn't protest. Sorry. First time she did protest. He attempted to sell it. She was unwilling to cooperate. And then he went and sold another field to Shimon, and this time she came along for the ride. She cooperated. She can't claim, I was just trying to cooperate, just trying to be nice to my husband, the Amila, because we tell her, if it is so, the nachas ruach avdos, that you were just trying to do nachas to your husband, lekama, iboylach lemi avad. You should have done that the first time around as well. Oh, the fact that you refused to cooperate the first time around and decided to cooperate second time around is evidence of your genuine interest to have this field sold. Right? So in that case, Rabbi Meir disagrees with Rabbi Yehuda. She can't claim nachas ruach. What happened last time? Oh, apparently, you're not trying to do nachas. The fact that you confirmed the sale this time around is indicative of your interest in going along with the sale. Let's say there's just one episode. He sold one field one time. And she ratified the deal. She confirmed it. I feel Rabbi Meir even Rabbi Meir would agree in this case that she can undo the deal by saying nachas ruach, sisi libali. We have no indication otherwise. So bottom line is we have a chiddush. Everybody, Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Meir, subscribe to the concept of nachas ruach asisi libali. However, Rabbi Meir disagrees on one account. If the first time around she complained, and the second time she had no issues, apparently she is going along with it. Umas nisan. Getting back to our Mishnah. She relinquished rights. We take it as fact. You know why? The cost of Leila Achar, because this wasn't the first time. This was his second field. He had already sold a field last time. And last time she said no way, she blocked it. And this time she's going along with it. Apparently. She's a willing partner. And therefore it goes through. Okay, so we had a Mishnah. Rachel and Leah, both coming to claim their ksuba. Problem is, Rachel had already relinquished her rights, as per any claims to the lokeach, who purchased a field from their husband. So she can't trouble him. Leah can. Rachel takes the field from Leah, because she's the first Baal Chayv. The lokeach says, what are you doing with my field? He takes it back. Leah takes it from him, around and around, till they make a compromise. We had a question. Dinu dvarim ainli, that's meaningless. That's not a proper kinyan. No, they made a kinyan as well. But what about nachas ruach? Well, we have three pshatim. Either Rabbi Meir does not hold of nachas ruach. Number two, we're speaking about a grusha. Number three, the Rabbi Meir would hold of nachas ruach. But not in this case, where last time she protested and this time she went along with it, apparently she's okay with the deal. Here comes a new sugya. It's not Hassam. We have a Mishnah in Maseches Gittin. Ein nifroin min nechasim mishubatim. B'makom sheyesh nechasim b'nei chayrin. Suppose Reuven buys a field, but he left some over in the hands of the seller. Later on, the Baal Chayv, the seller's creditor, comes around to collect some properties for his debt. He finds nothing in the hands of the Leiva. Can he go ahead and take the property from the buyer? Yes, provided that he did not leave over any free assets. But if he did, he left over b'nei chayrin in the hands of the leiva. Ein nefrain min nechasim mishubatim. You have no right to collect properties which were already sold and tied up. B'makom sheyesh nechasim b'nei chayrin, when there are free assets available in the hands of the leiva. V'afilein zeburs, even if they're inferior quality, it doesn't matter. That's the halach. Iboilu, here comes an interesting question. So I purchased a property, but I left behind enough assets for the Baal Chayv to collect from my seller, who happens to be the Leiva. But you know what happened? Ishtad of Bnei Chari. Those assets got destroyed, got ruined. Mahu litroiv, the litroiv mibishabdi. So now the Baal Chayv comes to collect his Chayv. He finds nothing of value in the hands of the Leiva. Can he go to the buyer? Well, you say, of course, he has nothing to collect from. Well, perhaps the buyer can respond by saying, look, when I purchased this field, I was fair. I was acting responsibly. I left behind enough to account for the debt. Just because it got ruined and destroyed, that's not my issue. Which way is it? Tashma, we're going to have a raya from our Mishnah. Not our Mishnah, Mishnah Baba Kama. We have a husband selling off his properties. He sold one property to Reuven. This time she did not go along with it. She did not sign on to the deal. She did not relinquish her claims from that property. So that's Reuven. Lasheni, husband turns around, sells another field to Shimon. And this time, she goes along, she signed on. Husband dies, divorces. Ibda Kesubos, Divi Rabbi Meir. She has no recourse, nowhere to collect her ksuba from. Why? Because buyer number two, well, she gave up her rights to collect from him. Buyer number one says, What are you coming to me? I left you over a field. When I purchased my field, I was responsible. I was fair. I left you a field to take from. So that's the halach. Divi Rabbi Meir. Problem is, there is nothing left to collect from. Sure, when you, buyer number one, purchased, you left field number two, but that field is gone. It has already been sold to buyer number two, and she can't collect from buyer number two because she gave up her rights vis-a-vis buyer number two, right? She signed off on that deal. She relinquished all rights in terms of collecting from buyer number two. So this is like our case, that the Bnei Chayrin, the available properties, are out of reach. So why can't she come back to Reuven, to the first buyer, and collect his property? If you're going to tell me regarding our question that we presented, if the available properties were destroyed, you can go back to the buyer. Although when he purchased, there were properties available, but since they're no longer available, you have a full right to go back to him That's just the assumption. It's true, I left behind properties, but you're still taking a chance. Those properties are gone. He'll still be able to come back to you. If that's true, then we don't understand the halacha of the ksuba. Why did she lose everything? True. She relinquished all claims as per buyer number 2, the second buyer, but Merisha and Miyatigbi, she can still go back to number 1. So again, although at the time of his purchase there were properties available, but those are no longer available. So why can't you go back to him? Why does the Brisa say, the Mishnah say, she has no recourse, nowhere to collect from? Amar Nachmar Yitzchak, you're right. My ibda, when the Brisa says she loses, ibda misheni, it just means she can't go to number 2. But certainly, she can go back to buyer number 1 and collect from him. Amar Rava, in classic Rava fashion, he says, Shtei Tshuvas B'davar, I have 2 responses. Chada number 1, the ibda ligamre mashma. When the Mishnah says she loses, it means totally. V'oy the Tanya, number 1. Number 2, I have a Brisa, which indicates the same halacha. Lava min echad. Reuven borrowed from Shimon. Umachar nechasav l'shnayim. And then he sold off 2 properties. 1 to Levi, 1 to Yehuda. V'kos of Baal Chayv lilakeach sheni. And the creditor commits in writing to buyer number 2, Yehuda. He says, look, I'm not going to deal with you. Enjoy your property. I'm never going to claim it from you. Din udvarim ein limach. Okay, so you can't go back to him. Can you go back to buyer number 1? No. Ein loy al lekeach rishon klum. You cannot present a claim against buyer number 1. You know why? Because he says, you can just say, what do you want from me? When I purchased property number 1, don't you remember that I left something on the side? There were still other properties available. So the Baal Chayv is stuck. He can't go to buyer number 2 because he specifically gave up rights. He relinquished any claims against him. He can't go to buyer number 1 who says, look, what do you want from me? I left you a property, which was then purchased by buyer number 2. So clearly, he lost everything. In contrast to Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak, who tells us that, no, it just means that you lost from that specific fellow, but you can go to the other one. We have a brisa which indicates otherwise. Oh, says Rava, but still, it has no ramification on our question. You cannot conclude on our question based on these halachas. You know why? Because Hasam Ihu da afsid nafshe biyadayim. I'll explain to you why. In both cases, the Isha with the Ksuba, the Baal Chayv with his debt, they cannot have any claims on any of these fellows. Afsid nafshe biyadayim. He brought about his own loss. Who asked you to give up rights? Who asked you to relinquish any claims against one of the buyers? Whether the Baal Chayv or the Isha in our case. Right? So it's your issue. What happened here? The Baal Chayv decided to give up all rights of collecting his debt from buyer number 2. Right? So one guy bought, he left over a property for a buyer number 2, who then received this release from the Baal Chayv. So what's Baal Chayv going to say? I can't go to buyer number 2. Let me go to buyer number 1. Despite the fact that you claim you left something for me, but it's unavailable. I can't access it. Well, it's your issue. Who asked you to give up rights to that karka? You destroyed your claim with your own 2 hands. This is very different from our shaila. Ishtaduf. It was a natural phenomenon. There was some storm. There was a flood that destroyed the field, damaged the field. There's nowhere to take from. It's an act of heaven. So in that case, perhaps, you still retain your rights. So we're speaking about a case where he was a Baal Chayv, had a large claim against a Loiva, who sold one property to Reuven, who left behind another property at that point. Then another property was sold to Shimon. No, Shimon, sorry. The Loiva sold one property to Reuven. And Reuven, when he purchased that property, he knew for a fact there were other properties available, still free, in the hands of the Loiva. But then those properties are no longer here. Ishtaduf. Perhaps in that case, the Baal Chayv has a full right to collect from Reuven, because there's nothing available. And he's not to blame for it. Ishtaduf. Amalei Rav Yemer Rav Ashi. You're not sure about that case? This is a daily occurrence in Bezdin. That when the available properties are no longer available, Ishtaduf Neicheri, the Baal Chayv goes to the purchased properties. I'll give you a story to prove it. Dahu Gavra, a story with this fellow. The Mishkein le Pardisa lechavre Lesser Shnin. He borrowed money, and he activated a process called Mashkanta de Surah. It's a certain type of collateral which involves giving the Pardisa, that's a vineyard, to the Malve, to the Baal Chayv. Take it for 10 years, enjoy it, reap the produce for 10 years, after which you return it to me, and we're even. However, the Mishkein le Pardisa lechavre. He was memashkein his pardes, his vineyard, with the creditor, le'eser shonen, for 10 years. V'kosh l'chamesh shnin. After 5 years, the vineyard dries up. No more fruit. Now the Baal Chayv is seeking to collect on his loan. V'asal l'kamei d'Rabbanon. They came to the Rabbanon, v'kosfale, and they granted the Baal Chayv a tirfa, a document which allows him to repossess properties from a purchaser who had purchased properties from the Loiva. Now, what right does he have to grab that property from a buyer of this Loiva who may claim to us as follows? Look, when I purchased that property, I knew that the debt was fully accounted for. Look, there was a mashkin system going on. They had a whole repayment process in place. Why am I held responsible? The answer is, although you were responsible, you were very responsible, you purchased a field knowing that the debt of your seller was being accounted for, but there's always that chance that a vineyard goes ori. Hasam nami, there as well inu. Udafsi, the nafshayu, the purchasers, are responsible for their losses. Why? Kivon dahavu yadi, because they knew full and well the pardisa of the kish. Very often, a vineyard goes dries up. It gets old. It stops producing. Rashi says kash means hisken. Got too old. It stopped functioning. They should have been careful before they purchased that property. They shouldn't have gone into that deal knowing that the whole deal hinges on a functioning vineyard. So in this case as well, there's reason to understand why the Chachamim allow the Baal Chayv to collect from the Loikeach. But in a typical situation, I purchased a property. I left behind a beautiful piece of property as a ben chayrin for the Malva to collect, and suddenly Ishtadav, some storm, some unlikely event, destroyed that property. Am I responsible? Yes. V'hilchasa the halacha l'maisa is Ishtadav b'nei chayri. If something happens to the available properties, tar from Mishtabdi, the Baal Chayv can go back and collect from the buyers. So basically we had a shaila, we had two cases where we were clear, and then we concluded halacha l'maisa. So the two cases were as follows. If the Isha or the Baal Chayv personally brought about their loss, they gave up their rights of collection, etc., that's called mafsad b'yadayim. Of course, they can't go back to the other properties. Likewise, if the Loikeach is held responsible, why'd you get into this knowing that you're taking a chance? Certainly the Malva has the right to go collect from him, but what about in your typical case? where I purchased something from a loiva with the awareness that there's another property sitting there available for collection by the Baal Chayv, and something goes wrong with it, Ishtaduv. What happens there? Can the Baal Chayv collect from me? And the conclusion is yes. So although preferably we go to the available properties, but the halacha is that if there's no backup property, for whatever reason, you can come back to me. Amar Abai, here comes another piece of Gemara. Nechasai lich, a person addresses an unmarried woman, he says, look, take these properties, it's a gift. V'acharayich leploini. Now after your passing, these properties will get passed on to another person. So he has a whole game plan. First you take it, after your passing, I want it to go to the next person. Then she goes and marries. And her husband steps into her life. Her husband has access to her properties. He's considered like a purchaser. He assumes ownership, so to speak. Baal loikeach havi is considered as though he purchased those properties, and that's it. It's over. The deal is gone. Ve'ein lacharayich b'mokem baal klum. Although the one who provided these properties had clearly stipulated, I want it to go to the next person after your death, that stipulation expires. Because the husband is like a purchaser. It's as though he purchased her properties. They're no longer hers. He made a tanai, he made a condition. Look, if at the time of your passing you still have these properties, it's going to continue on and be transferred to the next person. But she no longer has them. She gave them over to a leikeach. So the plan is terminated. Kiman, Abaya's shita is following which opinion? Kaitana. Like the shita of Rabban Shimon Gamliel found in the next price. Rabbi Machlekes, the Sanya. Nechasai lech. A person gives his assets to a person, and he stipulates, after your passing, those assets will be transferred to another person. Yoda the Rishon Machar, say the recipient goes and sells those properties. Hasheni moitzi madalakuche. According to Rebbe, that sale only lasts as long as he's alive, but once he passes on, those assets were never meant for him. Because when I gave it to him, I stipulated, I said, look, it's a limited offer. It's a limited time offer. It's only yours as long as you're alive. Whoever gave you permission to sell them off and preempt the next recipient. That's Rebbe Shita. The next fellow, the acharecha, the one that's meant to follow you, meant to get it after your passing, his zechus, his rights override your power of sale. That's Rabbi. But Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel Omer, he disagrees, and Abaye follows this opinion. No. Ein l'sheni elo ma she'shir rishon. The other fellow who was supposed to get these properties, the fellow that we call the acharecha, the other fellow, sure he gets. If there's available. There's nothing here. He already sold it off. So according to this shita, it's not like it was a limited gift. It was a full gift with a stipulation, with a t'nai, with a condition. I'm giving it to you on condition that if you have it as you pass on, it will go to the next person. But she sold it during her lifetime. It's no longer here. Asks the Gemara, is this the correct thing to do? We have the Isha who was given this gift with a clear stipulation that it's supposed to go on to the next person. She goes and gets married and transfers it to her husband. Did Abaye really advise this type of process? Abaye tells us, Ezehu Rasha Aram. Give me an example of a sly, wicked person. He advises people how to skirt their responsibilities and bring about loss to others. They do it without any personal interest, without any personal gain. Who's this Rasha Aram? A person who advises the other fellow how to sell off the properties to avoid having them transferred to the next recipient in line with Rabbi Shimon Gamliel. So if you do it yourself, fine, but for somebody to advise you to go ahead and do that, what right do you have to mix in and cause the other person loss? So why are we telling this Isha to marry Well, we're not telling her to marry. Mika amarti nasi, did Abaye tell her to marry? Nisis ka amar, just describing a fact. Okay, if she married, this is what happens. So in this case, we have a fellow giving an Isha who's unmarried, giving her assets with that Tanai. After Yoramisa goes to the other person, she married in the interim. Abaye says everything goes over to the husband, and the loikeach, the husband who's considered the purchaser, overrides the acharecha. Amar Abaye, here comes another halacha from Abaye. Nechasailich, he goes to an Isha, unmarried Isha this time. Take all these assets with a stipulation. V'acharayich plenty after you, it goes to the next person. Umachra. Now she actually sold it to somebody. So we have two differences. First of all, she was married to begin with. Upon receipt of this gift. Number two, she actually sold them off to another person, not her husband, another purchaser. Umesa. And now she passes away. We know we had this a couple of times before that the Baal, he's like the first purchaser. The Chachamim gave him a schos. It's as though he purchased it first, so therefore he can extract it from the customer. After she passes on, he's the Yerush, Habal, Moitzi Mad Lakucha. The Baal has the ability to extract all these properties from the buyers. V'acharecha mi'ad Baal. Listen to this. We're going to run into that circle again. Husband is stronger than the customer. Okay, that's a given. Because he's like the first customer. It's like he purchased it first. But the acharecha, the fellow that's meant to get this whole deal after her passing, the one who was promised all these assets after the woman's death, he is stronger than the husband. V'acharecha mi'ad Baal. Now, I know what you're thinking. Well, a minute ago we said that the husband is stronger than the acharecha. Now we're going the other way. The Gemara will answer it. The Gemara will say, well, since she was already married and he, the giver, had clearly said, look, I want this stuff to go to acharecha. What he was trying to say is, I want to preempt the husband. So this time he clearly stipulated as such. He said, look, it's a limited gift. It's not meant for the husband. So here we say that the acharecha is stronger than the husband. So he takes it out of the husband's hands. But it doesn't end there. The fellow that really purchased from the Isha, he's stronger than the acharecha. As per the previous Gemara, that a lekeach is stronger than acharecha. You see, only in reference to the husband do we say that the acharecha is stronger, because the fellow who gave it knew there was a husband around, and when he said, I want these assets to be transferred to acharecha, he meant despite the husband's presence. I want that relative to the husband, it's like a limited gift. It doesn't belong to you all the way. It's only a limited time thing, as long as you're around, otherwise it goes to acharecha. That is in reference to the husband's potential rights on the property. But when it comes to a regular purchaser, when she actually sold it to somebody, there we look at it differently. There we look at it like a simple condition. I'm giving it to you totally, and if you have something left, I want you to give it to acharecha. But now she sold it off. There's nothing left. So it's kind of a tricky case. The leikeach is stronger than the acharecha. But when it comes to the husband, the acharecha was given more rights than the husband. So it goes around and around. The husband is stronger than the purchaser. The acharecha is stronger than the husband. The leikeach mi'ad acharecha. The leikeach is stronger than the acharecha. Now we're stuck. What do we do? Everything ends up in the hands of the purchaser. That's the conclusion. Why? What do you mean? Why is this different than the Mishnah? We have a similar case. We're going around and around without any way out. They go chalila, means by a circle, around and around, until they compromise. And over here we're leaving it by the lekeach. Why? Why is he the lucky fellow? Answer: Hasam islu pseda lakul. In contrast to the Mishnah, where everybody's going to be losing, everybody has a claim. The lekeach bought, the Isha has her ksuba, Isha number 2 has a ksuba as well. We have to be fair to everybody. So let us divide it amongst all. Hacha, as opposed to our case, the only fellow that actually is incurring any loss, the only fellow that actually paid any money on this deal was the lekeach. Lekeach said he's the only one lost. He's the one that had paid anything. Therefore, the special takana, we leave it by him. Now the Gemara will ask that question that we mentioned before. We have one Abaye, we have another Abaye, which seem to contradict each other. Ozlal Rafram. So Rafram went, Omar l'shmaita. He presented the following question. Kamei de Rav Ashi to Rav Ashi. Mi Amar Abaye hachi. Is that so? That Abaye tells us that the Acharecha fellow is stronger than the husband, despite the fact that a husband is typically like a lekeach in his wife's assets. Acharecha is stronger? V'amar Abaye, didn't Abaye tell us earlier in the Amud, in the first case, was the unmarried woman, Nechasai leich, v'acharayich leplain. I'm giving you everything, but afterwards pass it on to the other person. Amda v'nisis, she gets married. Baal lekeachavi, the husband sort of takes over the show, he's like a purchaser. That's it ends there. Ve'en acharayich b'makam baal klum, and the acharayich fellow has no say in the matter. Lekeach is stronger than the acharayich. So why is the second case different? Amar leis, so he responded, big difference. Hasam, in the first case, the amar lakshi pnuya. This transaction took place with an unmarried woman. He says, look, I'm giving it to you. And whatever's left, you pass on to the acharayich after you die. Once she sells it, there's nothing available. It's finished. Hacha, as opposed to case 2, the amarla kshinusua. He presented her as a married woman. Maika amarlach, Maika amarlach. So what was he trying to tell her when he said that the other fellow down the line should be the one getting it after your passing? What was he trying to say? As opposed to whom? As opposed to your husband. Acharayach likni. The acharayach should be the one getting it. Baal loy likni. As opposed to the husband. So once he clearly stipulates that, we look at it differently. We say it was a limited offer. I'm not giving it to you entirely. You only have it for yourself as long as you live. After which it goes on to the next person. Okay, so let's conclude the last words of the Mishnah. V'chein baal choiv. And we have another thing. V'chein isha baal as choiv. So this is case number 2 and number 3 now, Mishnah, where we find like a sort of a circular type of situation, which is going around in circles, and we have to compromise. What exactly happened there? Tana, we learned in the price. V'chein ba'al choiv u'shnei lekuches, v'chein isha ba'al as choiv u'shnei lekuches. Rashi explains like this. You have a ba'al choiv, a fellow who's owed $100. Okay? His loiva, the borrower, actually had 2 small properties, each one worth 50. He sold them to 2 separate customers. Customer number 1 got 1 property. Then customer number 2 got the second property. The Baal Chayv relinquished his rights, any claims, with respect to buyer number 2. Remember, number 2. So Baal Chayv and number 2 are not going to interact. No claims between them. But he still retains any rights of claiming from Baal Chayv number 1, who actually purchased first. So really, he should have that advantage that he purchased it first. But to his detriment, the Baal Chayv made a deal with buyer number 2, but not with him. Okay, collection time. Baal Chayv goes to buyer number 1 and says, "Look, I got to get paid." Now, despite the fact that you're buyer number 1, but my chayv is 100, and here we have a field of 50 and another field of 50 there. So I really have to collect from both of you. I have a right to both fields. Okay, so he repossesses the field from buyer number 1. Okay, now buyer number 1 turns around to buyer number 2 and he says, "Look, hand over your field. You're behind me." Meaning, when I purchased my field, it was a guaranteed sale. The seller told me, "Ba'achrayis, if it's taken away, you get compensated." Okay, so I need to get compensated. Easiest compensation is to go to the fellow behind me. So he takes his field. So that field gets bumped up to buyer number 1. Now the Baal Chayv says, "Look, thank you very much. I'm going to take that as well. I couldn't take it when it was sitting by buyer number 2 because I had relinquished all claims against him, but now it's by you, buyer number 1, I'm taking from you." So he takes it. Buyer number 2 notices his field sitting in the hands of the Baal Chayv and says, "What are you doing with my field? Don't we have a deal? You can't repossess my field." So he takes it from him. So now it's back to buyer number 2. Buyer number 1 turns around and says, "What do you mean? I have a chrayas on my purchase. You have a field from that used to belong to the seller? Let me have it." So he takes that. So it just goes around and around and around in circles. Because basically every fellow has a right to take from the other fellow, but can't stop it from being passed on to the next person. The same thing with the Isha Baal Chayv, Ushnei Lekuches. The same idea. Instead of a regular Baal Chayv, it's an Isha who's owed Ksuba money. The same thing. Her husband had sold 2 fields. Buyer number 1, buyer number 2. She had given up all claims against buyer number 2. So she takes from buyer number 1. Buyer number 1 turns around, grabs from buyer number 2, but he can't stop the Isha from taking that field from himself. She takes it. Buyer number 2 turns around to the Isha. What are you doing with my field? Don't we have a deal that you don't touch my field? He takes that from her. But he can't stop buyer number 1 from taking it from him to compensate him for his loss. Isha turns around, takes it from buyer number 1. Around and around and around until they make a compromise. Says the Mishnah, upon his passing, the widow continues to get her mezainos, continues to be supported from the Yisayim's assets. It's a T'nai Ksuba. Likewise, her earnings go to them in exchange for the this deal. But they don't have to bury her. That's not their obligation. However, the kvura, the burial expenses are incumbent upon her inheritors. Let's say we're speaking of 2 sets of kids, so her kids, her family, looks after that, because after all, they're going to get her ksuba payment, and that corresponds to the chiyuv of kivura. Iboilu, there's a semantics question in our mission. We have alman and nizoines. Nizoines nan, is it read nizoines without a hey? Oy ha nizoines nan, the one that's being fed. What does that mean? Is it nizoines tanan? An almana is fed, period. Unka anshe gadol. This is in line with the shita of the anshe gadol back on the Fnun Beis. V'lo sagi, t'li havila, they can't get around without supporting her. It's not their prerogative. They feed her as long as she's around. So almana nizoines, it's an absolute halacha. Or perhaps ha nizoines tanan. The Mishnah is describing an almana which happens to be getting fed, because sometimes she is, sometimes she isn't. Uka anshe Yehuda, it's like the Yehuda people, who have a choice not to give her. Rashi brings, if they go, they pay her off the ksuba, they're no longer obligated to be mazener, to support her. So which way are we going? We'll see tomorrow, Bez Hashem, on a conclusion. Okay, so what do we have today? We had actually 4 cases where we have this ring around the rosy. We have, a relinquishing of a claim to one person, but not to the other. So you take from the other, and that person takes from the first person, and it goes around and around and around without any way out. So we have to compromise. We have 3 cases in the Mishnah. The Gemara did add a 4th case with a fellow giving something to the Isha with a T'nai that acharecha leploini. She sold it. Husband takes it away from the buyer. Acharecha takes it from the husband, etc., etc. Over there, we leave it by the lekeh because he's the one that lost money or that's about to lose money. That's one exception to the rule. Now, back to the Mishnah. The Isha relinquished her claims. I'm not going to bother you, Mr. Lekeh. How could you do that? This type of language doesn't really have any legal weight. Answer is she made a kinyan. So that's a true commitment. The question is, what about the fact that she can say, I was just trying to satisfy my husband. I didn't really mean it in earnest. We have a Mishnah that when a fellow purchases from an Ish and the Isha locks it in, she can just say, look, I didn't really mean it. We have 3 answers. Either that Mishnah is Shita's Rabbi Yehuda, and we're going with Rabbi Meir, or our Mishnah is going with Rabbi Yehuda, but we're speaking about a grusha who's not interested in satisfying her former husband, or, according to the third teretz, even Rabbi Meir theoretically agrees that Anisha can say, I'm just trying to be nice to him, but not if we have indication otherwise. And in our Mishnah, we happen to be speaking about a case where husband first sold to Reuven, and she protested. She gave him a hard time. And the second time around, she cooperated, which indicates that she's really going along with the deal. The Gemara presents a question as follows. Somebody purchases a field from a loiva, and at that time of purchase, he left some fields available for the Baal Chayv, but then something went wrong, ishtaduf. It got destroyed, it got ruined. Collection time arrives. Can the Baal Chayv go to the Lekeach? And the answer is yes. We had a story of Acharecha. So we had 2 separate cases. Case number 1. He offers an unmarried woman a gift, on condition that after her passing, it goes over to the acharecha, the fellow that follows you. And she sells it. Or she gets married, and that's considered like a sale because the husband assumes rights. That overrides any condition. It stays by him. There's nothing left for the acharecha. But if she's a married woman, in this case, by the way, that's a machlekes, right? We're going with Shitzer and Moshe Gamliel. Rebbe disagrees. In the second case, she's a married woman, and he said the same idea. Here's the stuff, acharecha leplani. Here is clearly trying to preempt the husband. So in this case, the acharecha supersedes the husband. We concluded with the almana, who's supported by the yisomim. She gives them the income. The kvura, well, that's the Yerushay Ksuba, her Yerushim's responsibility. All the best to you. Be well and B'suris Tevin.